Welcome to this session on the accountability of educational networks. This session is an outcome of an EU study on polycentric inspections of networks of schools. My name is Melanie Ehren. I'm an associate professor at the UCL Institute of Education, and I've been leading this study between 2014 and 2017. In this session, I will set out the conceptual framework of the study, which addresses the following questions. What are effective educational networks? Why do we need to hold them to account? And how do we need to hold them to account? Before we start talking about the accountability of networks, we need to understand what we mean by a network. There are many types of networks in education, such as networks of teachers and leaders in schools, networks of schools within a local authority, but in this section we're focusing on interorganizational networks, which are networks that have formal arrangements in place of a multitude of public and private organizations, agencies, and departments that have been constituted to facilitate collective action. And collective action is really important here. So this is not about school level networks or outcomes. It's about joint outcomes of a network, such as the implementation of specific education reforms or services, joint professional development, or school-to-school improvement and exchange of good practices and or peer reviews. So it's talking about aspects of the provision and or improvement of teaching and learning, which is the joint responsibility of the network instead of that of individual schools. Now, there are many different types of networks in education. Interorganizational networks are different in how they are structured and organized, and Proven and Keynes provide a really helpful categorization of different types of networks according to whether they are formal and mandated, for example, by central legislation, or whether they are informal and self-initiated, such as when schools initiate a network and decide for themselves on topics to collaborate on. Interorganizational networks can also vary in whether they have a centralized mechanism for decision-making in place on network activities, such as through a governing body, or whether all the members of the network have an equal say in governing the network. Networks may also differ according to size, geographical proximity, and of course the types of outcomes they generate. The key question we were interested in this project is, how can we hold networks effectively to account? Well, we understand effectiveness as an improvement of network-level outcomes, so outcomes that go beyond what individual schools on their own can accomplish. What do we mean by those types of outcomes? Well, it's outcomes that could not normally be achieved by individual organizational participants acting independently. Examples of such outcomes are in our project are from multi-academy trusts in England, whose outcomes can include maximizing the use of resources across partners in the network. In the Netherlands, we've included a network on inclusive education, so outcomes there are about providing support for all children in a region where children with learning or behavioral difficulties can stay in mainstream education and get support in their own school as much as possible from other learning providers in the area. We also have area learning communities in Northern Ireland in our project, and network level performance here is about the provision of a wide range of subject areas across schools. Here we've also seen great examples of positive outcomes, such as where pre-primary and primary schools have developed transition packs to support children and their parents when they transition from pre-primary settings to primary schools. In Bulgaria, we have networks of primary and secondary schools who collaborate through peer review on improvement of parental outcomes across schools. These type of network level outcomes clarify how the performance of a network is something different from the performance of its individual members, and it shows how the accountability of individual network members doesn't automatically address an evaluation of the performance of the network as a whole. This table, adapted from Pop and colleagues, clarifies this notion of network-level outcomes and how these may be different from outcomes on other levels in a network. We can see in this table that networks are comprised of individuals such as teachers and head teachers who work in an organization such as schools or a community center, which is part of a network such as multi-academy trusts in England or an area-based learning community in Northern Ireland. The network in turn will also be part of a broader community such as a local authority, a council, or a region. We can define outcomes for each of these levels, such as the quality of teaching and school leadership of individual teachers and head teachers, the quality of the school as a whole, or improved transition between primary and secondary schools as an outcome of the network, and how this in turn might lead to improved outcomes on the community level, such as when employment rates improve, when children are better educated, or when crime rates decline and social cohesion improves. Here we are, however, particularly interested in the outcomes of the network and how to organize external accountability of networks to improve such outcomes. Now, many countries already have strong accountability of schools in place, such as through Schoolinspections and high-stakes testing, and will perhaps don't feel the need to extend such systems to include the accountability of networks. So why would we need to hold networks to account? This slide shows a number of unintended consequences of networks and the problems they often face, such as fragmentation of delivery structures, self-protective behavior of individual members of the network, where they potentially also default on obligations to other members in the network, inter-organizational politics and struggles between members, which cause them to lose sight of the public objectives the network should be serving. Those are some of the unintended consequences we often see in research on networks. And examples of such problems have also been described, particularly for educational networks, such as by Robert Hill, Maren Hutchins, and Toby Greene for multi-academy trusts in England. They describe the tensions within new trusts where head teachers who are used to running their own school now have to work in matrix-like structures where finance, human resource management, and marketing professionals are employed by the trust, and where individual head teachers have to adhere to and work within the framework set by these centralized services. Hutchins and others also explain how these structures are often also unclear to parents and teachers who are now unsure of where to complain when things go wrong in their school. The imposition of a centrally mandated model on academies in the trust also often reduces school and teacher autonomy and constrains head teachers in developing innovative practices, and it sometimes also creates additional layers of decision-making and management with additional costs for communication and meetings which don't always benefit student outcomes. These are just some of the examples of potential unintended consequences of educational networks. And external accountability of networks needs to address these unintended consequences and problems of networking, and it needs to ensure that a network functions effectively and efficiently in meeting the outcomes for which it was originally established. It needs to provide answers to questions such as what is the added value of an educational network, and does the network contribute to the common good, and how can it be organized more effectively to add value and reach its intended outcomes. So what types of standards and what kind of accountability framework can improve the functioning of educational networks? And what kind of accountability system can take into account the various purposes and configurations of networks? as well as address those who are responsible for the failure of the network and for the improvement of the outcomes of the network. This slide provides a framework we used in this project, which helps us to think about approaches to the accountability of networks. The framework is inspired by the evaluation tree of Elkin and Christie, which summarizes evaluation theories according to methodology, valuing, and use. Let's start with the methodology of how to hold networks to account. Methodology is about how networks are evaluated in, for example, using qualitative or quantitative measures and the types of approaches used to evaluate networks. The methodology of most accountability systems is characterized by a top-down centralized approach of a standardized framework to judge the quality of single schools. When we think of the functioning and performance of networks, this approach doesn't allow for an assessment of the specific purpose and configuration of the network, and we therefore argue that it's not relevant for the accountability of networks. A more relevant and effective approach can be found in systems that use a bottom-up subjectivist approach where evaluation methods are used that look at and critique how the network itself has defined its outcomes and how it is working to achieve those. This would involve a goal-free evaluation where the members of the network and their stakeholders are involved in deciding on evaluation criteria and judging the functioning and performance of the network against those criteria. The interventions following an evaluation will be targeted at those who need to improve or need to improve their contribution to the outcomes of the network. In our study, we've included 4 examples of such inspections of educational networks. And these examples can also be found on our website. We looked at inspections of networks for inclusive education in the Netherlands, batched inspections and monitoring of multi-academy trusts in England by Ofsted and Regional Schools Commissioners, area-based inspections in West Belfast in Northern Ireland, and thematic inspections of a school peer review in Bulgaria. Our interactive map, which is also published on our website, schoolinspections.eu, displays examples of other inspections of educational networks across Europe. So I do invite you to have a look at these examples as they provide very interesting practices across Europe. Now, in our project, we were particularly interested in learning how effective it is to hold networks to account and whether accountability of school networks benefits student learning. And subsequent videos published on this website will present the case study findings of the 4 cases I previously presented answering these questions. Thank you for listening to this session, and I hope I've invited you to have a look at our website, which has more information. And do get in touch with us if you have any questions. We're happy to share our work.